The stars burned red with dying ships. Admiral Kong Min-ho stood on the bridge of the Soul's Pride and watched his fleet fall apart piece by piece. Every minute brought new reports of destruction. Every second meant more lives lost in the cold darkness of space. "Sir, the Busan Guardian is gone," Lieutenant Yoon Hana said. Her voice was steady, but Min-ho could see her hand shaking as she read from her screen. "The ancient star has lost power. They are drifting toward the enemy line." Min-ho nodded slowly. He had known this would happen. They all had known. The Kelvin Empire had conquered 12 star systems over 300 years. No species had ever stopped them. No army had ever pushed them back. And now their massive warships surrounded Earth like wolves around a wounded deer. Outside the bridge windows, Min-ho could see the enemy fleet. Their ships were beautiful in a terrible way. They were shaped like great silver blades, each one 5 times larger than anything humans had ever built. Their weapons fired beams of pure white light that cut through human ships like hot knives through butter.
Ow.
"How many ships do we have left?" Min-ho asked. Hannah checked her numbers. 30% of our fleet is still fighting, sir. But that number is dropping fast. 30%. They had started with 200 ships this morning. Now only 60 remained, and more were dying every minute. A young officer ran onto the bridge. His face was covered in sweat, and his uniform was torn. "Admiral, the orbital defense stations are falling. Station 7 just exploded. Stations 3 and 5 are not responding." Min-ho closed his eyes for a moment. The orbital stations were Earth's last line of defense. Without them, the enemy would have a clear path to the planet below. Billions of people were looking up at the sky right now, watching the flashes of light, wondering if they would live to see tomorrow. "Sir," Hannah said softly, "Supreme Commander Vorath is sending a message. He is demanding our surrender." Min-ho opened his eyes and looked at the main screen. The face of Vorath appeared before him. The Kelvin commander was a frightening sight. His skin was covered in dark purple scales that shifted color as he moved. He had 4 arms, each one ending in sharp claws. His eyes were completely black, like 2 holes in his face. "Human Admiral," Vorath said. His voice was deep and cold. "Your resistance is foolish. Your ships are dust. Your stations are broken. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Fight on, and we will turn your planet into ash." Min-ho looked at the alien face for a long moment. Behind him, his crew waited in silence. They were all afraid. They were all tired. But they were also watching their admiral, waiting to see what he would do. Lieutenant Hannah Min-ho said quietly, "Send the surrender signal." Hannah's eyes went wide. "Sir, are you certain?" "I am certain, but Admiral, we can still fight." We have done what we needed to do," Min-ho said. He turned to look at his young officer. "The rest belongs to the diplomats now." Hannah did not understand. None of them understood. But she followed her orders. Her fingers moved across the console, and a moment later, a surrender signal went out to every human ship in the system. The fighting stopped within the hour. The Kelvin fleet moved forward and took control of Earth's orbit. Their soldiers landed in every major city. Their flags rose over governments and military bases. Emperor Thalox himself appeared on every screen on the planet, announcing that humanity was now a conquered tributary species of the Kelvin Empire. The people of Earth watched in shock. Many cried, many cursed. Many promised revenge. But Min-ho did none of these things. He sat in his quarters on the captured Soul's Pride and wrote a message to someone on Earth. Someone who had been waiting for this day for a very long time. The message was simple. It said, "Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2. The person who received this message was an old woman named Park Soo-jin. She read the words on her screen and smiled a small, quiet smile. Then she stood up from her chair and began to pack her bags. What the Kelvin Empire did not know, what they could not possibly imagine, was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for 50 years. Ever since humans had first learned about the Empire, they had known this day would come. They had known they could not win a military battle. The Kelvins were too strong, too advanced, too experienced in war. So the humans had made a different plan. A plan that did not involve ships or weapons or soldiers. A plan that involved something the Kelvins had never faced before: patience. For 50 years. While the Empire conquered other worlds, humans had been doing something strange. They had been sending teachers to the conquered planets. They had been sharing art and music and stories. They had been learning alien languages and making friends with species that the Empire considered nothing more than slaves. The Kelvins had laughed at these efforts. What good were paintings and songs against warships? What use were cultural exchanges when you had armies? They had ignored the humans and their strange, peaceful activities, thinking them weak and foolish. They did not realize that every painting, every song, every friendship was a seed being planted. And now, 50 years later, those seeds had grown into something powerful. Something that could not be defeated by weapons alone. Admiral? Minho looked out his window at the Kelvin ships filling Earth's sky. He had lost the battle today. His fleet was destroyed. His planet was conquered. But as he watched the enemy celebrating their victory, he allowed himself one small smile. The real war had not even started yet, and when it did, the Kelvin Empire would learn a lesson that no one had ever taught them before. They would learn that there are some things more powerful than armies. Some things that cannot be burned or broken or conquered. They would learn that the smallest voice, when joined with millions of others, can shake the stars themselves. But that lesson would have to wait. For now, the humans would play their part. They would bow their heads and sign the treaties and pretend to be defeated, and the Empire would never see what was coming. The Imperial shuttle landed on the capital world of the Kelvin Empire, and 3 humans stepped out into the alien sunlight. Park Soo-jin walked slowly down the ramp, her left leg hurting with every step. Behind her came her 2 assistants, a young man named Baek Jun-ho and a young woman named Onari. Soo-jin was 63 years old. Her hair was gray, and her face was lined with wrinkles. She wore simple clothes and carried no weapons. When she spoke, her voice was so soft that people often had to lean closer to hear her. The Kelvin officials who waited at the landing pad looked at her and laughed. "This is what the humans send?" said High Minister Dravone. He was tall and covered in green scales, with a mouth full of sharp teeth. An old woman and 2 children? I expected warriors. I expected generals. Not this. Soo-jin smiled politely and said nothing. She had heard such words before, many times. People always underestimated her because of her age and her gentle appearance. She had learned long ago that this was useful. When people thought you were weak, they stopped watching you carefully. A group of soldiers led the humans through the capital city to the Imperial Palace. The city was enormous, filled with buildings that reached up to touch the clouds. Millions of Kelvins walked the streets, all of them looking at the humans with curiosity or disgust. Some spat on the ground as the humans passed. Others shouted insults. Soo-jin kept her head high and her face calm. She had prepared for this moment her entire life. Nothing these aliens did could break her spirit. The Imperial Palace was the largest building Soo-jin had ever seen. It was made of black stone that seemed to eat the light. Great statues of past emperors lined the entrance, their stone eyes staring down at visitors with cold authority. Armed guards stood at every door, their weapons humming with deadly energy. The humans were given small rooms on the lowest floor of the palace. The rooms were plain and cold, clearly meant to remind them of their place as a conquered species. Soo-jin did not complain. She simply unpacked her bags and prepared for the work ahead. The treaty signing was scheduled for 3 days later. Until then, there would be meetings and negotiations. The Kelvins wanted to discuss the terms of Earth's surrender, how much tribute humans would pay, how many resources they would provide, how completely they would disarm their remaining military forces. Soo-jin sat through these meetings with patience and grace. She agreed to everything the Kelvins demanded. Tribute payments. Yes, of course. Resource extraction? Whatever you need. Military disarmament? Absolutely. We will destroy all our weapons. The Kelvin negotiators grew bored. They had expected the humans to fight, to argue, to beg for better terms. Instead, This old woman simply nodded and smiled and agreed to everything. There was no sport in defeating such a passive enemy. The humans are even weaker than we thought, High Minister Draven reported to Emperor Thalix. Their diplomat is a tired old woman who cannot even walk properly. She has agreed to every demand without question. This conquest will be our easiest yet. The emperor was pleased. He ordered preparations for a grand ceremony. The treaty signing would take place in the Great Assembly Hall, the largest room in the palace. Representatives from all 12 conquered systems would attend. The entire empire would watch as humanity officially became their newest slave species. But on the night before the signing, something changed. Sujin sat alone in her small room when Junho knocked on her door. He entered quickly and closed the door behind him. His face was serious, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "Ambassador," he whispered, "the package has arrived. Our people have confirmed that the network is ready." Sujin nodded slowly. "And the other systems?" "The Marathi, the Vex, the Dren. All 11 conquered species have confirmed," Junho said. "They are waiting for the signal. 50 years of work, Ambassador. 50 years of building connections and friendships. It all comes down to tomorrow." Sujin was quiet for a moment. She thought about all the people who had worked to make this day possible. The teachers who had traveled to alien worlds, the artists who had shared human culture with conquered species, the scientists who had built bridges of knowledge between different civilizations. Most of them were dead now. They had never seen the fruits of their labor, but their work lived on. "Kelvins think we are weak," Sujin said softly. "They think we sent an old woman because we have given up hope. They do not understand that an old woman can be the most dangerous weapon of all." Nari appeared at the door. "Ambassador, I have finished reviewing the Galactic Compact documents. Article 7 is exactly as we remembered." The Kelvins never checked. They never imagined that we would know their own laws better than they do. Sujin smiled, and for just a moment, her gentle eyes showed something hard and sharp beneath their surface. "Tomorrow, we teach the most powerful empire in the galaxy a lesson they will never forget. We teach them that strength is not just about weapons and ships. We teach them that the weak can defeat the strong if they are patient enough and clever enough." She stood up from her chair, ignoring the pain in her leg. "Get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow will be a long day. And by the time it is over, the galaxy will be changed forever." Junho and Nari bowed and left the room. Sujin walked to her window and looked out at the alien stars. Somewhere out there, on 11 different worlds, millions of people were waiting. Conquered species who had suffered under Kelvin rule for generations. People who had been told they were worthless, that they would never be free, that resistance was impossible. Tomorrow, Sujin would show them that hope was not dead. Tomorrow, she would prove that even the smallest voice can shake an empire. She was just an old woman with a bad leg and a soft voice. But she carried 50 years of human planning in her heart, and the hopes of billions of people on her shoulders. The Kelvins had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how Sujin wanted it. The Great Assembly Hall was the most impressive room Park Sujin had ever seen. It was so large that clouds actually formed near its ceiling, hundreds of meters above the floor. The walls were covered in gold and precious stones that sparkled in the light of 1,000 floating lamps. Great pillars of black marble rose up like the trunks of ancient trees, each one carved with scenes of Kelvin victories throughout history. 12,000 Kelvin. Nobles filled the galleries that lined the walls. They wore their finest robes and their brightest jewels. They laughed and talked among themselves, excited to witness another species being brought to its knees. For them, this was entertainment. Another conquered world to add to their collection, representatives from the 11. Other conquered species sat in a special section near the front. The Marathi, with their silver skin and 3 eyes. The Vex with their insect-like bodies and clicking voices. The Dren, the Palax, the Orin, and all the others. They sat quietly, their faces showing nothing. They had been through this before. They knew what it meant to be conquered. At the center of the hall stood a simple table with the treaty documents waiting to be signed. Behind it rose the imperial throne, a massive chair made of bones and black metal. And sitting on that throne was Emperor Thalox himself. The Emperor was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall. His scales shimmered between purple and black as he moved. 4 muscular arms rested on the arms of his throne, each finger tipped with a claw that could tear through steel. His black eyes watched everything, missing nothing. "Bring forward the humans," Thalox commanded. His voice echoed through the hall like thunder. Sujin walked slowly toward the signing table, Junho on her right and Nari on her left. The Kelvin nobles whispered and pointed as she passed. Some laughed at her limp. Others made jokes about her age. She heard every word but showed no reaction. When she reached the table, High Minister Draven handed her the treaty documents with a cruel smile. "Sign here, human. Sign away your planet's freedom. Join the great family of conquered peoples." Sujin took the documents and read them carefully. Every page was filled with demands. Earth would pay tribute every year. Earth would provide workers for Kelvin mines and factories. Earth would destroy all weapons and never build new ones. Earth would obey every command from the Empire without question. The hall fell silent as everyone watched. Holographic cameras floated in the air, broadcasting the ceremony to billions of viewers across the Empire. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The moment when humanity would officially become slaves. Sujin picked up the signing stylus. She held it over the document, and then she paused. "Before I sign," she said, her soft voice somehow carrying through the entire hall, "I must ask a question." Emperor Thalox leaned forward on his throne, amused. "Ask, human. Though nothing you say will change your fate. Your empire operates under the Galactic Compact, correct? The ancient laws established by the first civilizations 10,000 years ago." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was unexpected. No conquered species had ever asked about laws before signing their surrender. High Minister Draven frowned, suddenly uncertain. "Of course," Draven said carefully. "We are civilized beings. All our conquests follow compact law. Why do you ask? Then I assume you followed Article 7 during your invasion of Earth?" The silence that followed was so complete that Sujin could hear her own heartbeat. She watched Draven's face change from confusion to concern, to something very close to fear. "Article 7 pertains to cultural preservation assessments," Draven said slowly. "A formality. A minor requirement." "Formality," Sujin repeated. "Did you conduct the required assessment before declaring Earth a conquest territory?" Draven did not answer. He was frantically searching through his datapad, his clawed fingers moving faster and faster. The Emperor's scales had shifted to an angry red color. "What is Article 7? Thalox demanded. "Explain this at once." Sujin smiled gently and answered for them. "Article 7, Section 3 of the Galactic Compact states that any species with documented cultural exchange agreements with 3 or more sovereign civilizations cannot be classified as a conquest. Territory without unanimous approval from those civilizations. Ridiculous." Thalox roared, rising from his throne. "Humans had no such agreements. You were an isolated, primitive species. You knew nothing of the galaxy when we found you." "We were isolated 50 years ago," Sujin agreed. "But we have been very busy since then." She nodded to Nari. The young woman stepped forward and activated a holographic projector. Suddenly the air was filled with floating documents. Treaties, agreements, contracts, hundreds of them. Each one bearing the official seals of different civilizations. "Cultural exchange treaties," Sujin explained calmly. "Between Earth and every single one of your conquered species. The Marathi signed an agreement with us in 2147. The Vex in 2152. The Drin in 2155. All 11 conquered species have formal cultural ties with humanity." The hall erupted in chaos. Kelvin nobles shouted in confusion. The representatives of the conquered species looked at each other with wide eyes. Some of them began to smile. They had known this day was coming. They had been part of the plan all along. Emperor Thalox's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Silence. The hall fell quiet. The Emperor's black eyes fixed on Sujin with murderous rage. "This is a trick," he said. "These documents are fake. Your pathetic species could never have accomplished this. Every treaty is registered with the Galactic Compact Archives," Junho said, his voice steady despite the Emperor's fury. "They are verified and time-stamped by the archive itself. If you doubt their authenticity, I can provide the authentication codes. I can provide witnesses. I can provide whatever proof you require." Sujin set down the signing stylus. "Emperor Thalax, under Article 7 of the Galactic Compact, your invasion of Earth is legally void. We are not a conquered species. We are a protected civilization." She paused and let her words sink in, and that is only the beginning. Emperor Thalax stood before his throne, his forearms trembling with rage. The scales on his body had turned completely black, a sign of extreme anger among his species. When he spoke, his voice shook the very walls of the great assembly hall. "You dare come into my palace and speak of laws? You dare lecture the Kelvin Empire about rules?" He stepped down from his throne and walked toward Sujin, each footstep making the ground shake. "I could kill you where you stand. I could burn your planet to ash. I could destroy every human in existence." Sujin did not step back. She did not look away. She simply stood there, a small old woman facing a monster 3 times her size. "You could," she agreed softly, "but you will not." And why is that human? Because the Galactic Compact is not just a set of suggestions, Emperor. It is the foundation of all interstellar law. It is respected by thousands of civilizations across the galaxy. If you break it openly in front of witnesses, with cameras broadcasting to your entire empire, you will face consequences even you cannot imagine. High Minister Draven rushed forward, his datapad shaking in his hands. "Your Majesty, she speaks the truth. The compact is enforced by the elder races. They have not interfered in our conquests. Before, because we always followed the rules. But if we violate Article 7 so publicly, they will act." Thalok spun around to face his minister. "Then fix this. Find a way around these treaties." "The treaties are valid," Draven said miserably. "I have checked and double-checked. The humans have been building these agreements for 50 years. They are registered, verified, and legally binding. We never noticed because we never looked. We never imagined that a primitive species would understand our own laws better than we do." Sujin stepped forward, drawing the attention of everyone in the hall. "There is something you need to understand, Emperor. Something your empire has never learned in all your centuries of conquest." She paused and looked around at the 12,000 Kelvin nobles watching from the galleries. She looked at the representatives of the conquered species, who were now sitting up straight with hope in their eyes. She looked at the floating cameras that were sending her image to billions of viewers. "You focused on the strong," she said. "You measured power by the size of armies and the strength of weapons. You conquered world after world, and each time you thought you were building something permanent. But you forgot the oldest rule of conquest." "And what rule is that?" Thalax growled. "You forgot about the weak?" Sujin's soft voice carried through the silent hall. "You ignored the conquered peoples because you thought they were powerless. You never watched what they did with their limited freedoms. You never checked if they were talking to each other. You never imagined that they might be building something together right under your nose." As if on signal, lights began flashing on datapads throughout the hall. Kelvin officials pulled out their devices and stared at them with growing horror. Reports were flooding in from across the Empire. "What is happening?" Thalax demanded. Draven's face had gone pale. "Your Majesty, we are receiving alerts from every conquered system. There are coordinated actions happening on all 11 worlds. Rebellions." "Are they fighting?" "No, Your Majesty. They are filing legal challenges. Millions of them. Every conquered species is demanding a review of their treaties under the Galactic Compact. They are claiming that Article 12 was violated, that Article 15 was ignored, that dozens of provisions were broken during their conquests." Sujin watched the chaos with calm satisfaction. "For 50 years, we have been preparing this moment. We sent teachers to your conquered worlds, and those teachers helped people understand their rights under galactic law. We sent lawyers disguised as artists, diplomats disguised as scientists. We've built a network of friendship and knowledge that spans your entire empire." She turned back to the Emperor. "Your invasion of Earth is void under Article 7, but that is just the beginning. Under Articles 12 through 15, every treaty with every conquered species must now be reviewed for compliance. Our lawyers estimate that the legal proceedings will take approximately 40 years. Thalek stared at her. 40 years. During which time, Sujin continued, your empire cannot collect tribute from any disputed territory. You cannot use their resources. You cannot enforce any demands. The Galactic Compact requires that all parties maintain the status quo until legal matters are resolved. The Emperor looked around the hall. His nobles were in shock. His ministers were panicking. The conquered species representatives were openly smiling now, some of them crying with joy. You planned this, Thalok said slowly. You lost the battle on purpose. We knew we could not beat your fleet, Sujin admitted. Your ships are better. Your weapons are stronger. Your soldiers are more experienced. So we did not try to win a military war. We fought a different kind of war instead. She picked up the treaty documents from the table and held them out to the Emperor. Earth will not be signing your treaty today, or ever. Then she did something that no conquered species had ever done before. She turned her back on the Emperor of the Kelvin Empire and walked toward the door. Ambassador Sujin, Thalix called out. She stopped but did not turn around. This is not over, the Emperor said. You may have won this battle with your tricks and your papers, but the Kelvin Empire does not forget. We do not forgive. Sujin finally turned to face him one last time. We are counting on it, Emperor. Because every time you remember this day, you will also remember the lesson we taught you. And what lesson is that? Sujin smiled her gentle smile. That the meek are not weak. That the conquered have voices. And that sometimes the smallest people change the galaxy not with weapons, but with words. She walked out of the great assembly hall, Junho and Nari beside her. Leaving 12,000 Kelvin nobles in stunned silence behind her, the empire that had never been defeated, had just lost a war without a single shot being fired. 3 months had passed since the day in the great assembly hall. The galaxy had changed. More in those 3 months than it had in the previous 3. 100 years Park Sujin stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting a small moon. This moon belonged to no one. It was neutral territory, chosen carefully for that reason. And on this moon, a new organization had built its headquarters, the Galactic Cultural Alliance, through the transparent walls. Sujin watched ships arriving from across the galaxy. Marathi cruisers with their elegant silver hulls. Vex transport ships that hummed with strange energy. Dren vessels covered in living plants that somehow survived the cold of space. Ships from all 11 formerly conquered species, now flying free for the first time in generations. Jonsho walked up beside her, a datapad in his hands. He looked tired but happy. They had all been working without rest since leaving the Kelvin capital. The Emperor has agreed to negotiate, Junho reported. His advisors finally convinced him that 40 years of legal battles would bankrupt the Empire. Their economy depends on tribute from the conquered worlds. Without that tribute, their whole system falls apart. Sujin nodded slowly, as we expected. Military empires never plan for lawyers. They never imagined that someone might use their own rules against them. The first negotiation session is scheduled for next week. The Kelvins are asking for reduced penalties in exchange for releasing their claims on the conquered worlds. They can ask for whatever they want, Sujin said. We will listen. We will be fair. But we will not be weak. She had learned many things in her 63 years of life. But the most important lesson was simple. True strength was not about crushing your enemies. True strength was about building something better. The Kelvins had spent 3 centuries destroying civilizations. Humans would spend the next 3 centuries helping to rebuild them. Nair appeared at the entrance to the observation deck. Ambassador, the Marathi delegation is asking for you. They want to discuss the joint defense proposal. Tell them I will be there shortly. Also, the Vex representatives have submitted a formal request for a trade agreement. And the Dren want to talk about educational exchanges. Their children have never been allowed to learn their own history. They want help building new schools, Sujin smiled. This was what she had dreamed of for 50 years. Not victory over the Kelvins, but cooperation between all the peoples they had oppressed. For too long, the conquered species had been kept apart, forbidden from talking to each other, taught to see themselves as inferior. Now they were finally coming together. The Kelvins made a mistake, Junho said, looking out at the arriving ships. They thought that keeping their subjects separate would make them easier to control. They never realized they were creating a shared experience. All these species have something in common now. They all know what it feels like to be conquered. They all understand suffering. And that shared understanding is what brought them together. Sujin nodded. Humans understood this because we have lived it. Our own history is full of empires that rose and fell. We have been the conquerors and the conquered many times. We learn that oppression creates connections between the oppressed, even when the oppressors try to prevent it. She thought about all the people who had made this day possible. The teachers who had traveled to alien worlds decades ago, never knowing if their work would matter. The artists who had shared human music and paintings with beings who had never known beauty. The scientists who had taught alien children about stars and mathematics when the Empire wanted them ignorant. So many of them had died before seeing the results of their efforts. But their legacy lived on. A new ship appeared outside the station. This one was different from the others. It was a Kelvin diplomatic vessel, small and unarmed, carrying the Empire's representatives to the first negotiation session. Even from this distance, Sujin could imagine the faces of the Kelvin diplomats inside. They would be angry and humiliated. They would want revenge. But they would also be afraid, because for the first time in 300 years, they were not the most powerful people in the room. What do you think will happen now? Junho asked. Will the Empire really accept peace? Some of them will, Sujin said. Others will spend years looking for ways to strike back at us. There will be difficulties ahead. Challenges we cannot predict. This is not the end of our struggle. It is only the beginning of a new chapter. She turned away from the window and looked at her young assistant. But we have given the galaxy something it did not have before. We have given it hope. We have shown that the mighty can fall and the humble can rise. That is a gift that can never be taken away. The doors to the observation deck opened, and delegates from a dozen species began to enter. Maradi and Vex, Dren and Palax, Orin, and all the others. They came to speak with the human ambassador, to share their ideas, to plan their future together. 3 months ago, these species had never been allowed to meet. Now they were becoming friends. Sujin watched them with a full heart. She was 63 years old, and her legs still hurt with every step. She was tired, and her work was far from over. But standing here, surrounded by the first fruits of 50 years of human effort, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt proud. Humans had looked at the galaxy and seen an empire that could not be defeated in battle. So they had refused to fight a battle. Instead, they had planted seeds of friendship and knowledge and hope. They had waited patiently while those seeds grew. And now, at last, the harvest had come. The Kelvins had built their empire on fear and force. Humans would help build something new on trust and cooperation. It would take time. It would be hard. But it was possible, because in the end, the universe did not belong to those who conquered. It belonged to those who connected. Admiral Kung Minho had understood this when he surrendered his fleet. Every teacher and artist and scientist who had traveled to alien worlds had understood it. And now the whole galaxy was beginning to understand it too. Park Sujin straightened her back, ignored the pain in her leg, and walked forward to greet the delegates of a new alliance. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in a very long time, it was also bright. And somewhere out there, among the stars, the voice of humanity joined with millions of others in a song of freedom that the Kelvin Empire could never silence.